All right, welcome to Jay's Corner, everybody. My name is Jay O. I am a certified financial planner. I have written the book Maximize Your Medicare, published in this 10th edition, probably something like that. I've lost count at this point. MaximizeYourMedicare.com. And what people have come to know is that prior to any of this, I have spent time on three continents at the high end of global financial markets, seeing events that make the housing crisis look like just one of a common event. Anyway, we are here today to discuss, some dramatic events that have occurred over the weekend. The President of the United States has levied tariffs, announced intended tariffs to take effect on Tuesday, 25% across the board, Canada and Mexico, 10% with the People's Republic of China. Now, I'm going to discuss its effect on financial markets. We have the early look at this point. Futures markets opened an hour ago, and I intentionally left us for an hour because I wanted to see what had started out. So, in other words, it's a complicated thing, but on the weekend, it's a very difficult matter because now I think that we can agree that this new president does desire the spotlight. And that is not necessarily going to always be negative. No, I didn't say that. But nevertheless, that he now has replaced Chairman Powell as the person moving markets more frequently, more dramatically. Certainly, I think that that is very fair to say. Okay, and again, I'm not making determination to say, okay, these announcements are going to be plus or minus. The market will determine that. Uh, you know, it will vote. It will vote 24 hours, 5 days a week, basically. And just now, we have learned kind of the reaction to these announcements outside of the political, uh, you know, fire bombs or fireballs that people will throw at each other, etc. That is a conversation point for a different location. Okay, I'll just leave it with you there. This is not really a politics zone. This is about your financial understanding, your understanding about how markets work, and it's also its effect on your financial setup, how it can affect your savings investment plans, your strategies, so that you can pay for bills and plan whether you're 30, whether you're 70, right? It will affect you differently. And so now we'll just get into it. With that all, I would have liked to talk, an hour if we had followers who were here for, me talking about, Mavericks Lakers trade, which is like far more entertaining than this. But let's just get into it here. So this is the this is a snapshot, if you will, of futures markets. So this is my Thinkorswim, and I just like created this list of stuff that I look at, and nothing, of course, ever financial advice here. And what I would tell you, so I do have early impressions here, and it is very early, right? In other words, the liquid markets, the stock markets are not open anywhere, right? Pretty much, we will open in Asia in the next few hours, right? But for example, Japan, not open, not at all. New Zealand, I want to say, will be open, shortly, if not otherwise. But what we have here is the futures markets have voted already and started, early poll, right? And you can see it here, which is these top lines. And I'm going to start right up here at the top here because this to me is always the place that I start. To newcomers here, my slogan for Jay's Corner, the newsletter, be sure to subscribe to it, jo.substack.com, is stocks for show, but bonds for dough. And the reason is, and it's very consistent, that I would tell every person this, is that you want to understand how you stand financially. My question is going to be, how much does stuff cost? How much does it cost? And that is determined by the cost of money. The cost of money is interest rates. The security sensitive, whose price sensitivity is most directly tied to interest rates, are bonds. Therefore, bonds for dough. Okay, so that is the short answer. It also explains to you why credit card debt should be eliminated, right? I didn't say mortgage debt because there are a couple of other nuances, right? In the United States, mortgage interest expense is tax deductible, therefore lowering the cost. In other words, how much does stuff cost? How much does it cost? I find the dynamic here very instructive, always, which is most of the line items here, the numbers that you see actually changing to me are pretty muted and within expectation, right? Meaning that we knew, for example, down here, that trade wars mean that if you're exporting from other locations into the United States, your exports just got more expensive, meaning that your likelihood of selling them to the United States has declined. That is the intent of a tariff. The fact of the matter is, if you're a person that is struggling or feels pinched, stretched financially, life almost immediately, in a couple of days, will get tougher. Why? Because imports from Canada and Mexico are going to increase by 25%. The margin at Jay's Fruit Market is not 25%. We don't have the leeway to eat 25% extra cost on the avocados that we're selling to you. That's just the practical reality. Jay's Fruit Market is at a what? 2% margin, operating margin, and I'm not kidding. 2%, 1%. I know this because I know owners of these locations have asked them, tell me what your margin is. So the idea that the input cost goes up instantly by 25% on avocados has to be passed on to the consumer. So either it's going to stop selling, in which case we basically have to stop carrying it, or number two is we're going to raise prices up to the point that you stop buying. For the consumer, then, that means higher prices. There's no getting around this fact. I didn't say, again, we're going to leave judgment. We're going to leave whether we should or shouldn't do this, whether this, that, or the other. I'm talking about what people will face. The reason I say this back around here and the complicated feedback loops start, which is that now these currencies, and you'll see other locations where this will also be the case. So I'm going to switch over to another screen here. And here, what we have is Bloomberg, and this is the foreign exchange rate. This is the euro, dollar, euro. But you can see that what will happen is this will be even more dramatic when it comes to other currencies. And we will get there here. You'll see currencies here, and in the Americas, so we'll get to there we go. You can see the Canada dollar here has dropped by another %. And there it is, 1.05%. And you'll see year to date from 1.43 to 1.47. These are enormous moves, right? You're talking about the exchange of goods and services across borders. And now all of a sudden, right, what was worth X is now worth, what, 0.04? It's a lot in these terms because you're talking about all of them, the flows. And you're going to see it also dramatically when it comes to here, Mexico. And you can see actually pretty muted. And that's what I was saying is that when I see these reactions here so far, early doors, right, very early, is that I would tell you that this set here looks well within the expected range. If you had told me, for example, that based on the headlines, based on what would occur, that the NASDAQ be down by 2%, I would have shrugged. I would have shrugged. Now, 2% is a lot, right? I'm not disputing that. For example, you can see here the S&P 500 minus 1.6%, small caps minus 3%. Again, none of this is surprising relative to each other, right? Because we do not care in isolation. One piece of information in isolation by itself is just not instructive, right? I don't care, right? I can have my own view about how much my beloved brass elephant that I hauled, it's very heavy, that I hauled from India is worth. I think it's priceless. But it's compared to what else I could have bought with the same money. And that is the comparison that we're always driving at. And what you can see here is that I'm looking at these matters, and given the inputs, then we're seeing if anything is out of pocket, meaning something doesn't make sense relative to one another. Today is going to be a lot shorter than I thought, right? Because I actually am surprised, if anything, at the muted reaction. We'll discuss on why it could be muted. So, and you can see here the rationale to the Russell being much worse off, right? Is that the input goods, change of input goods, change of all of these dynamics would hurt who? They would hurt Jay's Rib Shack, Jay's Fruit Market, small shop more, much more. Now, we're yet to see whether or not, things like auto part, which are hauled from Mexico, which are now 25% more, well, either the car's going to cost more or they can't raise the prices, in which case you basically can't produce the cars at that price. That is yet to be seen and yet to be announced. So that's why I'm saying very, very early, but this is what we have. What we have now so far is fairly muted. Even things like Bitcoin, for example, here it is. Bitcoin is 97,685, and this is not exactly the spot price. There's a difference between the futures price and the spot price. We're not here to discuss the bond, the futures basis here. But that's the difference between spot and futures, called the basis. But anyway, you can see the point being is that minus 4%. On the most volatile types of securities, we would have expected risk off. If you would have told me in isolation that NASDAQ minus 2%, Bitcoin minus 4%, I would have just shrugged. In other words, relative to each other, very, very well behaved. That's, candidly speaking, the observation here, less than an hour and 15 minutes after futures markets have opened. More so surprising by its stability. Now, again, still early. We don't have the rest of the planet awake and actually acting, right? We don't have stock markets open. We don't have stock markets open yet. Okay, let's just go to some of the other, I've included in the links in the video, kind of the decision-making process and things like that. So I'm going to tell you a short story. So I'm 18 years old. I land in Ann Arbor. And there I thought my first career aspiration, one of them, would be political science professor. And in Ann Arbor, to those who know, the staff there were illuminaries. A lot of them. A lot. Ken Lieberthal, kind of one of the world's China experts, Daniel Axelrod. These names, titans in the field. One of those was to discuss kind of international relations, and part of that what we learned when I'm 18, 19, to give you an idea on how strong an impression it continued to leave on me throughout adulthood, is this idea of game theory. And now you roll the clock many decades later, and what you have is game theory again. Now, we have this phrase of game theory in many walks of life, and you see it in chess here. You know, probability weighted, there's another guy here. And this becomes the question and probably the explanation of why we have muted results. And that's kind of my feedback loop here today. So I've left this first thing about what game theory is. We're not going to resolve, or we're not going to review precisely what game theory is, but it's basically something called the prisoner's dilemma, you versus adversary. And this is a exercise with multiple iterations. It's not just one time. You're going to play many innings, infinite innings. And the score is going to look maybe some result in one of the innings, but then you're going to consider over time that you're going to iterate many, many times. And for that, that's kind of what game theory is, if you will, different results. And what this particular video is, it refers to strategies that people would use, or, party one, party two would always use. And then on and on it would go, and then what would the results be? And it referred to actually a study. The study, originated in Ann Arbor and called the Correlates of War. And so that's not actually made mention in here. I always smile when I see explanations of game theory, because they're always referring to something called tit for tat, and tit for tat was the winner of this study in the Correlates of War kind of study that is referred to here. It's not given credit in this video. The point here is that we are going to be entering advanced game theory, right? Which is that in here in Bloomberg and everywhere that you see, you will see that these headlines will be, and then you're going to see over here top stories, and you're going to see other parties weighing in. You are going to see other parties weighing in. The difference between when I'm 5 years old and today is that we don't have in the United States the weight, the influence and some of that is not anyone's fault, right? We are just simply in a location where, what is it, 1.7, something like 1.4, 1.7 billion Chinese. So you just have the law of large numbers. They were going to catch up, especially from where they started. Right? Some of that is our doing, by the way. I'm not going to get in our doing, meaning that, our ability in arithmetic is lacking. That is really the nicest way I could put it. So in a world where you're talking about math ruling the world, that we are, fundamentally this far behind is something that, is not solved by politics or policy. We've had this during Democratic presidents as well. It just has not mattered. It has not mattered, right? This is the way that it is today. Whether I don't have a fix for it overnight. We're going to have this tit for tat. We're going to have what we don't know is what strategies the different countries are going to take. We could have overwhelming retaliation. We could have targeted retaliation. You can see what's here. Uh, and I'm not here is kind of editorialism. So I mean, I'm not here for to editorialize, right? This here is to say that, you know, something which is decidedly negative. I'm just here to tell you that inflation for consumers, when you go to the grocery store, when you go to the gas pump, they will reflect higher prices. Whether or not you think that that is okay, because we're law inflicting certain results which will benefit the United States later, that remains to be seen. I am saying with quite a high degree of certainty that today, tomorrow, the next day, this next week, you are going to see higher inflation. No question. What does that mean for you on top of that when it comes to planning? That, for me, becomes the central question, right? Because the reality is, right, we cannot cherry pick. Okay, this is the exact time that this stuff is going to move around. If you can, you don't need to have sophisticated plans. You just cherry pick and buy the bottom. You just cherry pick